What's up? This is Steve Schmidt. This is the Magnetic Podcast. Again, want to stop right there. This is our 6th episode, and what we've been doing is running these little mini sprints, and we're going to release about 24 to 30 clips from these first 6 episodes all at once. We're going to title it different things on different social channels so we can test it and share the name with you that works best, and it will be different on different channels. Nobody talks about that shit. We do, and we think it's great. And Callan Harrington, a guy who I've gotten to know over the last 2.5, 3 years, via LinkedIn, is somebody who's been creating content. That's how I got to know Callan. And I had a ghostwriter at the time who I just absolutely love, still just think she's just the best person ever, Mackenzie. And so I would look at his content and I would look at the stuff I was doing. And there was people around, it seemed like at least Callan, 3 years ago, where I don't want to say the OGs because that makes it sound like it's some sort of ego thing, but people were creating content before a lot of other people were. And you were one of those. You believed in it. You spent money to do it. You were like a lot of, call it bootstrap CEOs and founders who had to look at, $3 to $5 grand over here. Do I spend it to do this? Do I do it myself or do I not do it at all? And you have a million of those decisions every day. But today we're only going to talk about content because you are the CEO and you are the founder. So even to take an hour out of your day as a startup founder, I know we want to make it impactful for you too. So everybody make sure you listen, because what we're going to do is, Callan, you're going to tell us a little bit about yourself, but I'm going to drill deep and you're going to pick apart and kind of give us the playbook on your content plan, because I think that's what people today are really going to want to hear after they hear sort of your background, Callan. So welcome to the Magnetic Podcast, brother. It is good to see you in the chair. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm excited for this. Like we were talking about before, I never get the chance to break down my whole content strategy, and just like yourself. And I think that's actually how we met originally, because we shared a similar ghostwriter. For me, it was, and Mackenzie is awesome, and I really wanted somebody to shorten my learning curve on LinkedIn. I looked at every single channel you can think of, right? Things were going well, but I knew I had to grow beyond my warm market and having a services business. And LinkedIn made the absolute most sense, but I didn't have a clue on what I was doing. So worked with Mackenzie for quite a bit, probably about 1.5 to 2 years, and before transitioning to writing my own content. But like how fast that shortened learning curve was significant.
Yeah, man. We shared the same ghostwriter, and to her credit, I think the one thing we talked about is, I recall saying like, hey, is this working for you? And when we say working for you, I think you said, well, depends. What does working mean? And at that point I said, well, is it turning into revenue, not just pipeline? You're like, yeah, man. Actually, you talked about a newsletter. I was on and off about a newsletter. I'm like, oh my God, Callan, there's so many things to do. Like, what are you doing that's effective? We didn't even talk about YouTube then. Like, that wasn't even on my mind at all. Like, and I've been in 3 meetings this week where YouTube has come up, and people are all like, I don't know. And I'm like, so the number one search engine, Callan, for the people who are now 11 to age 26, whereas millennials, is indeed our Googles and our TikToks. Yeah. And when they're going to be looking for stuff, I thought about this the other day, because I thought about this podcast with you, and we're going to be sitting down and talking. And I thought, well, I'm sitting here making dinner in my townhouse by myself, and I'm listening to a podcast on the TV from Rich Roll and Rick Rubin. And the only reason we couldn't see them is because they were in some bizarre location, and Rick Rubin was probably tripping on LSD and he had his shirt off. That was like why they couldn't be seen on camera. But I was like, you know what? This is the thing. It is media. And whether it's done organically or whether it's sponsored, we are now all available to stream to anybody in the world at any time, just like a TV show. And my view is that people who truly get subscribers to their channel, just like you did when you were a kid to a Different Strokes or whatever, that's going to be like, maybe they only follow you and learn from you for 2 weeks, right? But you're going to be on their subscribership. And then I thought, okay, well, I'm 46 years old, Callan. So anyways, I got really excited about all that conversation. And I was like, that's what we're going to talk about. He doesn't know it, but that thing inspired me so much on the TV, because the thing that I want to break down first is listening to a guy like Rick Rubin, who I've always said it's like a guru who I don't even see. Like I grew up listening to the music he produced. So I never thought of Rick Rubin as some guy sitting there telling me like life advice. I was like, he's the guy who made the Chili Peppers album, Blood Sugar Sex. Yeah. Man, like he made that thing hit. And then he made Korn's album and like other bands that I liked all over here. Run DMC. Oh yeah, Aerosmith. He did that song. Run DMC and Aerosmith, Walk This Way. came from him going, what about this? Dun, 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 dun. Dun, 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 wow. And he played that on the guitar. And I was like, damn. And so anyways, I was like, okay, so now the world is following. And why are we all so curious about this guy with a beard who kind of looks like your drunk uncle? And I'm like, we are so hungry to talk to people who can make us wiser, make us laugh, and make us see something that we can't see in the feed. And I'm like, all right, well, I saw you for a reason. Now, it's business. We're not Rich Roll and Rick Rubin. We are two guys who own bootstrap businesses. But I want to talk to you about, when did your content journey begin specifically? Like, walk me back to the moment when you're like, I'm going to post something. And I'm going to do it. And a lot of people might say, I don't really remember. I'd have to go back and look, but it wasn't that great. But walk us through that, because I think we want to start the journey there as we get to build up to your playbook.
It's a great question. I can tell you, I remember this specifically because so when I was evaluating, when I first started off the business, 2021, and honestly, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. I was getting clients left and right. I had a pretty good network going into it. And I wasn't even trying to start a growth consulting company. I was looking to get some consulting agreements. I had just wrapped up an exit at the previous company, and I was going to get a couple agreements and then self-fund a SaaS or an insurtech company. And I ended up getting consulting agreement after consulting agreement, really enjoyed it. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to ride this out, see how this goes. And once I started to get out of my warm market, I'm just like, oh man, I'm going to have to get clients outside of this. And cold calling for a services business is really tough, especially if you don't have content where they're going to see. Like, you could cold call them, but if they go to do research on you and you're not anywhere, it's hard for them to validate whether this person really knows what they're talking about or not.
Because I was trying to like do some research and just showing people like, oh gosh, there he goes. I had a question there. I want to back up. So you mentioned on accident, but the thought before that, like when was the thought? I want you to break it down. Like, when was the thought where, well, I could do this or I could do that? Because yes, and people need to understand, and this is where I really want to plant on, is a lot of people who are listening to this might not even know the difference between SaaS and services. So tell everybody out there like why it is hard as a services company and what a services company is and why it's hard. Because I think that'll make people go, oh, that's different.
So when you think of my whole background had been in SaaS. I've been in tech for over 10 years, in sales leadership for over 10 years in the SaaS world and tech space. And I never ran a services business. So when I was getting these when I say a services business, that's where you're performing services on behalf of a company. You could think of a consultant, you could think of an advertising agency, but I'm not selling a product, I'm selling a service. And in the SaaS world, you're selling a product. You're building technology specifically to solve a pain in the market to help somebody out. And typically you're going to buy that, I should say you're going to rent that by providing a monthly payment, annual payment, whatever that might be. Now, in a services business, you can't touch it. It's not tangible. So you're selling your expertise. You're selling your knowledge. You are selling that if I am going to back up what I tell you I'm going to do. So it's totally different. You have to prove that you really are knowledgeable, that you really are an expert on what you're doing, which is why for me, it was, okay, I've got to build content. I've got to get, I have to be able to create this and push this out there and to separate myself from
to show
the
your
other
expertise.
people that are out there.
Yeah,
exactly.
Because at the end of the day, your expertise is what they're buying. That's it. Now, do you have teams that support you? Walk me through your business. So let's break down kind of who you are and do it differently than most podcasts where they do it at the very end. We'll get to where we can find you, but now break down your business, because I think that's important for people to know. Are you a solopreneur, or do you have a small company with fractional support? Because that further in a services business, so people know, right? You have to really grow, but you don't have these. You have 10,000 competitors. Really, you have to sell into some sort of awareness piece, like you said, where people go, "That's interesting. That guy knows what he's talking about, or that gal knows what she's talking about." And so I think that as you look at your content journey, think about the things that when you started doing it, what were you making people aware of? Where 3 years later today, what are you making them aware of? Is it more of the same, just more mature? Has it completely changed? Has the format gone from text only to video? I mean, I see a lot of video that I like with you. I see a lot of breakdown. Are you looking at doing other things with your content? Because that can be daunting, right? Are you trying to automate as much of it as possible on the back end so you have an editing crew? Are you doing it yourself at night after, everybody goes to bed? Walk me through sort of that entry level to your playbook, because I think that's a mindset thing as much as it is tactics. Because I know for a lot of people, it's going to be it's going to be the thing they go, yeah, I got to make content, but I just got to do this other thing first. Yeah, I got a customer proposal, but that's more important because that's revenue. Content, like I don't want to be that guy on video. Anyways, like, you know what I'm saying? So walk me through the mindset piece, because that's important for people to know, because to me, that's where a lot of people fail. They can't get through that mindset gate.
Well, I'll tell you, when I first started is totally different from where it is now. And that's why working with Mackenzie was so helpful, because my mindset was I knew that I needed to be on LinkedIn. That's where my audience was. That's where my potential dream clients were. Like, that's where people were active in the world that I play in, which is mostly talking with founders and revenue leaders at early stage companies, because we play in the 1 to 10 million market. That's really our specialty. So when I was going on to LinkedIn, I had actually written a number of things prior, but I didn't want to post. So like I had this mental block. I'm like, oh man, like I would keep trying to edit it and make sure it was perfect, and I was too nervous to post, which it's crazy because I also do improv and stand-up comedy, which you would think that would be like 10 times harder. But for me, I couldn't get over this roadblock of, oh, this is my business reputation. If I put this out there, it's out there now. So it was kind of a big step for me. So I was like, okay, how do I put a forcing function in place to get me over that roadblock? Well, that was working with Mackenzie. If Mackenzie's pulling the trigger, I'm good. It doesn't matter. It's already done. I'm not going to take it back once it's done. And then it's like one of those things where after the first post, I was like, oh, I should have been doing this all along, which actually, funny story about that first post. The first post that I did was because we work a lot on the RevOps side, helping companies build scalable systems through Salesforce, HubSpot, and anything across the RevOps stack, was a post comparing HubSpot and Salesforce. And we wrote pretty boldly on that, right? Because a good ghostwriter, this is where Mackenzie was so good and still is she's such a good journalist. She can pull all this. It's all your words. She's just pulling that out of you in order to write it in a way that's going to make the most sense for the platform. So we did this write up on HubSpot versus Salesforce. And I was pretty aggressive on some of these pieces. Well, that post ended up doing really well. Like first post, almost 200 likes. And this is when reach was crazy. So, it got pushed to 30, 40,000 people.
Oh my God.
And I just had this flood of comments from HubSpot evangelists that were like, whoa, that's not true. Like, there's no way. And I was like, I don't know how to handle this. That's exactly right. How do I handle this? So I got that kind of that rude awakening on my first post, but it's exactly what I needed, because I was like, if this is as bad as it's going to get, this is great. Because I also had a number of people reach out to me right off of that post, like, hey, I didn't know you did this. We just implemented HubSpot. We'd love for you to help us out with this. And the same on the Salesforce side. So it was really interesting.
Yeah. Well, you just said something I want to plant and go back. So, I mean, Mackenzie, I always say to me, I said it right out loud. Sometimes I would just say, hey, I work with a ghostwriter. Because it felt awkward when people come in and say, like, God damn, I love your posts, man. Like, holy shit. Like, I either want to do business with you, or that one made me cry, or like this one, like, and I was like, damn. And Mackenzie's like, that's all you. And I'm like, well, not really. I mean, yes, I did say that, but you brought it out. And then when it came to life, it felt kind of like this gift almost, right? Like, but you can write that way. And Mackenzie would say, yeah, anybody can write those words. It's a matter of how do you get to the point where you write those words?
Yeah.
Instead of what you originally said. And so she, called both a great editor, knew when to kind of go for the nuclear button and only use it like once a quarter. God, one of them, she got me in deep shit, but I was just like, you know what, whatever. I'm like, I'm getting death threats. I'm getting Reddit posts, but I'm like, she's like, yeah, I've been on like the worst of LinkedIn on Instagram before. And I'm like, yep, there's a whole thing there. And so that's when I decided to get like thick skin, man. And I don't know if you've ever now, as you're maturing in that, faced sort of any, I don't know, for lack of a better term, shit talking about sort of your content. I think I'll give you a good example. Like nobody really says it out there, right? But everybody who's in a competitive space is like, oh yeah, Callan, I really love Callan. Like behind the back, like, yeah, Pete, I don't know, man. He does very good work, or whatever. And it's kind of like I say everywhere else in life. It's like high school, it's like college. People want to network with you, and then people want to kind of compete with you. But you're in this space of extreme differentiation, and now you got to plant right now and say, like, what is my content playbook? How can I compete with 10,000 other people? Do you want to sustain? Do you want to grow? Because with that, to me, I bet you have a financial P&L that you're forecasting out for your business. I bet you have a revenue funnel in HubSpot or Salesforce for your business. I want to know, do you have a content plan that you're looking at daily, weekly, monthly? Are you looking at attribution? Are you looking at performance? What are you doing to adjust to it? Are you considering other channels? Are you on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, go down everything else? I don't even know what else I'd be missing. Probably Snapchat. It's endless. But like, where are you today in that journey, and where do you want to go specifically? Maybe start with exactly like, all right, here's how I start my day, because I'd love for people to hear this down to, do you engage in the comments? Like, do you feel it's effective? Do you pay attention to the trends? Do you always keep your head down? So I'm going to give it over to you, brother 321, but walk us through your playbook as if you didn't know you were going to be doing this today, because he did not. But if you know Callan, you would also know that he knows his shit. So he's going to be able to break this down for us on the spot. So brother, give us your existing content plan and where you're going with it.
Yeah, so I'll give you kind of the overall strategy, then back into those specifics. What changed is really when I really started kind of taking this over where I'm doing all of that writing, right? And that was a hard decision, right? Because that takes time. There's a lot more that has to come as a result of this, where I recommend to people all the time, like, at least start out with a ghostwriter. It's a huge, especially if you're an exec within a company or whatever that might be, it's going to help you shorten that learning curve dramatically, and then see if you enjoy it. If you really enjoy it, then you can always take it over on your own if you want, or could be a perfect fit for you. Where things started to change for me was really when I launched the newsletter. And I'm a pretty big believer in and I don't know if it was Jay Klaus that coined this or not, but how the thought process is, there is a discovery platform and then there's a relationship platform. And you've got to have at least one of each. A discovery platform is is a place like LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, any of these places that are going to take the content that you've created and push this out to other people for them to discover you and for them to discover the content that you're creating. You rent your time on these platforms, right?
Safe to say algorithmic?
You should, yeah, I guess you could look at it like that, but it's more they have a built-in audience.
Okay, so
and they're going to push that.
Feed-based, I'm going to get to see the people I want to see.
It could be feed-based, right? YouTube could also be looked at as a discovery platform because they're going to push videos in front of other people. Well, I guess it still would technically be feed-based, but yes, it's somebody that has a pre-existing audience that's going to push your content out to more people.
Got it.
But it's great. The challenge is you're at the mercy of that platform. If that platform decides that, people of your followership are going to be deprioritized and they're going to prioritize new creators or new people posting content or whatever that might be, you're in trouble. And I think we've all went through this before. I think a lot of people are going through it right now. I know I certainly am seeing it. Yeah, same. Horribly. I was curious about that.
Yeah, I deleted the post. I tell everybody, they go, what are you doing? A performance like shit. I said, I delete it. They say, why? I'm like, I don't benefit from a post reaching 88 people.
That's so good to hear. The challenge was mine came on podcast day where it's kind of hard. Like, this is the release date. I could redo it, but now we're really getting into the nuance. So there's the discovery platform. Discovery platform for me is LinkedIn.
Yeah.
My relationship platform, I needed one of these because one of the things that I saw is it was great. People were seeing what I was doing, but I didn't have a way to capture those people. If they sent me a message and said, hey, I'm interested in learning more about your business, whatever that might be, great. But those aren't, to me, those haven't been like just getting like, okay, keep posting and then you get tons of leads. I know a lot of people do it, but that wasn't the case for me. So I needed a place to deepen that relationship with the people that discovered me on LinkedIn. That's where the newsletter came in. So the newsletter, I'm writing in depth on certain subjects. You talked about Rick Rubin. I'm a huge fan of Rick Rubin and just following what interests you, which is so important in content because
Yeah.
if you're going to do this for a while, you better be interested in what you're writing about.
Oh God, yeah. You get sick of yourself real quick.
So fast. And so for me, it was logical for me. Like I like building how-tos, right? So I was building these how-to guides in the newsletter, and then the newsletter was driving my social content. So this is often called the hub and spoke model. So the hub that I'm building is the newsletter, and then I'm writing 6 posts based off of that. And Justin Welch is where I originally pulled this from. But essentially, you've got a post that is an observation from that, a story from that, a contrarian take. So what do you believe that's different about this particular subject?
Yep.
And an analyze. Why did this happen? If something was in there, why did that something happen? And that keeps it really on point. Now, if you think about that, if I'm going to be posting about this for like 6 posts, so let's say over the next 6 weeks, I schedule those out, I'm going to be way more selective in what I put in that newsletter.
Yeah.
Because if it's not good, that kills a lot of my content strategy as a whole.
So
then the
you're
newsletter.
arranging and reverse engineering the newsletter in your post strategy.
That's exactly right.
Okay, thank you. Just to clarify, I thought that was a moment to stop, and let's double click into that because I think that's what I do as well. It's not. I knew I'm not the only one, but to me, I think it's worth saying, like, why do you do that? Because a lot of people would say, well, I can't do a newsletter, so why would I do that? And I go, well, if anything, it makes your posting a lot easier.
Tim Ferriss had this great quote, right? Or he's talking about podcasts, and he said, because podcasts, of course, are super competitive. And he said, if you were to do a podcast, what's the bare minimum? Or if you didn't get a single listener, you still got value out of it. I think about everything in that regard when it comes to building some sort of followership. Yeah. So with the newsletter, I think probably something I didn't realize, but I realized immediately after writing the first one was this helped clarify all of my thoughts. It helped put it within a process, and it made my social posting 10 times easier.
Bam.
So totally agree with that.
Also
that
got you leads, right? So let's talk about that. Everyone wants to go, oh, wait a second, you made money off this? And I'm like, oh, interesting. So let's stop there and say, like, was it the newsletter that you went like, oh, that's it. That's the magic stick.
It was definitely what the newsletter brought to me was I can now take people off of LinkedIn and get their email and build a direct relationship with them, deepen that relationship with them so they understand what I do. Because when you think about it, whether it's promoting a webinar, if it's anytime you're just trying to get them further down the funnel, the response, most of your attendees are going to come from email as opposed to posting on LinkedIn or whatever that might be. They might see it, they might like it, but that doesn't mean that they're going to register. Doesn't mean you won't get people on it, but most of them are going to be driven from your email list. So I'm just taking them further down the funnel.
Okay. How many subscribers do you have? I want to really let's pick it up. How many did you start with for your newsletter, and how many are you at now?
Started with 0. I'm only at right about 300 subscribers on the key is that they're engaged.
Oh, you said the magic word. That's it.
And I'm realizing now it has grown as far as like you see certain kind of leaps and bounds, but it's small, but it's super engaged. And that's the key, because if you could have a ton of people, a ton of followers, wherever that might be, but if that doesn't turn into anything, it feels good, but it doesn't have the actual results.
It doesn't feel good when the results aren't there. It feels good for a little bit, and then you kind of sit there and you're like, shit, I spent 3 hours writing a newsletter. It went over like a fart in church. But also the creative process, I will say, is that's where the artist in me is always like part of the process.
Yeah.
Keep going. Rick Rubin go, there's no difference between good art and bad art. There can be none, because it's not art. And I go, and people would go, what? And say, well, guys, whether or not we want to admit it, like there's a creative side to this where I think a lot of people can benefit and get to be so much better at business by simply giving themselves a creative outlet where they start to enjoy and also say things out loud that they hear, that are captured in time, that can be repeated to help other people, but also hold you accountable. because the thing I want to rip into next in your playbook, because you just broke it down really beautiful. We're going to move to do you comment next, but let's stop here. Have you ever been trolled?
Oh God, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, it's so funny. I literally was. We had one yesterday. I mean, this is just. It's like, and I was talking with somebody else. She had a great post, and I saw she had one on. I just saw a comment because they commented on something I commented on, and then they commented on hers, and it was like I reached out to her. I was like, look, it's like it's just nothing you can do about it, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can't. You know this way better than I do because you've got a much larger audience than I do. But
I've been
the bigger you
torched to
get,
flames,
the bigger you get, you can't. It's just part of the territory, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And to me, it gets easier just because you get thicker skin about it. But I can't tell you that it doesn't bother me when I read it and it's like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Because it takes up headspace. I don't know if I've cracked that code yet.
I don't know if it's crackable, man. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people about that, because when whatever happened with me went down, and like, just kind of speaking that out loud, like, shit happened in business. And then like you're on the platform where the people are that you hired for the thing that didn't work out. I say, but you have to be accountable to that. Like, and so for me, like planting in that, like, oh, you're on a platform, you call this a community. If you've made a mistake, are you willing to sit in it and say,
Oh
like,
yeah.
I'm still here, or I'm gonna be better, or I'm gonna learn from this? And I gotta be honest, like that was the toughest thing for me, was sort of this, like, how do I sit and reinvent myself on the fly? You know what I'm saying?
I do. I think there's two different cases. There's the case of like somebody that's just straight up trolling, right? Like there's no
Yeah.
turning this person around. Like they are out for blood no matter what. Nothing you can do about it. And in that scenario, I go by just don't give it air. If you
Yeah.
give it air, it'll continue to get pushed.
Yeah.
And then there are other times where I was wrong about something.
Yeah.
And I'll give you another example. That first post that I mentioned, I was wrong on some of those pieces. And I did a follow-up post to that to say, hey, I made a post about this.
Yep.
Here's where I was wrong.
Boom.
Here's what I've learned since posting that. And here's my opinion on this now. That did equally as well as that other post, because you got two options. You could double down, which many people do, and many people are very successful with doing that. Or you can use that to expand your viewpoint, learn something, and tell other people what you've learned.
Let me ask you a really interesting question, because I want to dig into this world of you get content. I used to sell telecom systems. For everybody who's out there who doesn't know what that is, it was a wired system on a desk, and then eventually we released these things called cellular telephones. You probably know it as your iPhone today. That's where I cut my teeth in sales, and we had resellers out there, right? And their job was to say, I provide the most value, therefore you can buy anything from me. You want to meet with me, not Steve. He's only on team red. I'm on all the teams here. And I thought, okay, fast forward to 2023. Let's say that software did that same thing, which it does. Partnerstack.com, if you haven't been there. They're not a sponsor. I'm just throwing it out there. It's one of 4 or 5 major affiliate pushes that are out there. And the interesting part to me about that is to see, like, who's going to come to the table and say, for example, I'm Callan, and I'm going to be the best HubSpot RevOps demo shop. And you're going to come to my YouTube channel and you're going to learn so much that you're going to subscribe to this, because you're going to plan your entire 2024 strategy around this. And eventually you probably buy some stuff from me, right? You buy fractional RevOps, but they're saying it with different softwares, right? And I think that's really interesting, because I see nobody doing it. And I see a lot of affiliate links, but I don't see anybody educating on differentiators and being like a channel where people come to. Do you see that as being something that you would find interesting, or you think would go over well on a platform like YouTube, that maybe you start to borrow some of that and try and bring it into LinkedIn to truly inform people on multiple things and be that guy or that gal who's like, hey, and then you use content to win that market? Do you think that would be effective?
Well, I could tell you, I know it's effective. Ali Schwanke with Simple Strat, she has the channel HubSpot Hacks and does exactly that. Walks people through all the different pieces of HubSpot, ranks number one and on YouTube for HubSpot, and gets a ton of inbound leads.
There you go. There's a play. Now, if you went to Apollo, it's there. Lemlist, it's there. Outreach, not there. SalesLoft, not there. And so it's interesting to see what you see because everybody's, now has, call it the thumbnails. And I always say, if I really want to kind of age myself, let's deep dive into a guy like Mr. Beast. If you don't know Mr. Beast, he said, the only thing I studied was thumbnails.
Yeah.
And when I perfected the thumbnail, I started making $1 million a year and never looked back, right? I looked at that and I said, that is so cool to me because that is knowing your platform well enough to know the point matters the most is not the content at 8 seconds in. Because that gets pretty intense. I want to break this down for you, Callan, because there's some YouTube stats that are pretty wild. It was the thumbnail that got the people to click on it. Because when you're on YouTube, unlike LinkedIn, it is a search algorithm. You do not go there to typically, you go there to look for something. And so if I go and type in RevOps, your job is to show up in the first 10. Really, really hard to do because you're competing with paid. You're competing with other spaces depending on your keyword. But let's, for fun, while we're on this podcast, just go in. And I'm going to go into YouTube and start telling you some stats. But when I go into YouTube and I type in RevOps, who do you think is going to show up at the top of that search?
Somebody teaching what is RevOps.
A guy named York E with 1.3K views 10 months ago. It's a very slimly viewed, it's the hottest job in the market right now. But yet when you go to type in RevOps, now if I typed in what is RevOps, right? We all know that that's a question that a lot of people are probably going to ask, and this could probably get some really good content. I mean, there's Chris Walker, 1,000 views-ish, right? So it's not like this banger topic, Callan, that you have to go compete with like an outreach, right? Where they say sales engagement software. Mm-hmm. And unless you have 1 million views, like you're not showing up on the first 5 pages. So I've told a lot of people, I think, and I almost know that if you're not using YouTube like you were LinkedIn 4 years ago, you're leaving an even bigger treasure mine of, call it, lead pipeline away. What is your take on YouTube today? And be honest with me, because I could tell you until 2 months ago, it was nada. It was, we do this for our clients, but I was a shoemaker's son. Is it something you considered? Is it part of your strategy? Is it part of your 2024 playbook at all?
Yes and yes. The only reason we're not doing anything on YouTube right now is focus. I want to totally focus on LinkedIn. The newsletter's very new. It's only been up for a couple months. The challenge is what do they call it? I think you said this, but I'm not 100% positive. Like shiny platform syndrome, right? Every time a new one comes out, I want to jump on it.
Yeah.
Now, YouTube, I really like because it's geared more towards long form. There's a lot of short form, and I think short form is a lot of fun. But a great strategy, which a lot of people do, is take your greatest hits on LinkedIn, take your greatest newsletters, and build videos for those on YouTube. You already know that people are interested in those, and YouTube's great too. You can use there's a number of different ways to look at the analytics on what people are searching for on YouTube as well. When you're using that, you can back into those other things.
Yeah, and I think. Too, it's important to know that a lot of, I say us, let's include everybody on here who maybe doesn't do this for a living in a company. It's like any other platform, like you said. If all you did all day was study Facebook, you would win on that platform. If all you did all day was study YouTube. And so I love what you just said. The scariest thing for me, besides niching down in business and seeing it was right when the algorithm started messing with people too. So I had multiple days in a row and I'm like, oh my God, 8 likes, 14 likes. And of course, this is right after I got trash. So I'm like, all right, it's over. I'm like, there it is. There's a story on what, on how LinkedIn can not work for you. And I just kept showing up and I realized the content sucked. My mindset sucked. I was in a really shitty place in my life. Yeah, and therefore, I was writing out I should have been writing for therapy, honestly, instead of for business, because it wasn't good. It was just trying to figure out who the fuck am I, man? Am I anybody gives a shit about listening to? Am I any good at all? And then I released a digital training course and I said, let's charge $200. I invested $6K into it, right? All the hard earned money, here we go. Boom. Lost $2K on the course. So I'm like, well, what the fuck am I doing wrong? And Turns out it was nothing because really I was doing these little tests on how to do things the wrong way, which is to test other platforms kind of half-ass. Like I'm going to kind of do a training course. I'm going to kind of do a digital product. Like, okay, was that the best investment of my time? No, it might've been a shiny diamond, or it could be a good thing, Callan, to cross off the list and go, not an area of focus. Like leave that for
Yep.
the people who make a living doing sales training. Focus on the things you're good at. Okay, so talk to me about moving ahead here. So, but we're going to get into your business and break down some things. But I want to know before we talk about moving ahead, if you're okay with it, because this is the fun part of the show.
Yeah.
What percentage of your revenue comes from LinkedIn?
Direct leads, like people messaging me in order to sign up.
They paid you money, and the original place they found you was LinkedIn.
If I said the original people that found me via LinkedIn, close to zero.
Okay.
Close to zero from direct leads. Now, what I will tell you is two or three of my biggest referral partners found me via LinkedIn.
Yeah.
If I had to say that, 75, 80%.
Boom. There you go. And I guess, I always forgot to include that, which is a shame on me. When I would say LinkedIn revenue numbers, I'd say 40% of that was partners that I met on the platform. So I love that you called that out, because that's the channel partner thing, right? How can we align? How can we help each other? And that's kind of the unforeseen treasure. People think about direct customers. What about aligning with somebody where you can help them and they have the direct customers? And then you can do something they can't do. And maybe you modify your offering to go, oh, well, I could work with you in this capacity. And it gives you this flexibility to do some things in your business where, Callan, for all intents and purposes, you could wake up tomorrow and turn on the microphone and say, okay, here's what we're doing now, and change everything and develop an entire content strategy and probably spin up a new business in 6 months. Do you think that's a safe bet, knowing now that you know the playbook, that if this thing didn't work out, you could turn it down, spin up the next thing, and you'd run the playbook?
That's a good question. I know the structure, and I think about this sometimes. Like, man, if I had this back when I was with these tech companies, what would I do differently? Some things I would do differently. Some things I wouldn't. I would definitely see a bigger play, and I understand just the importance now of a newsletter. I think I took that for granted, and we had huge, 20, 30, 40, and I'm not saying this is like over, like people have got hundreds of thousands of subscribers, but 20, 30, 40,000 subscribers at these different companies. And we were mostly using them to send out offers and things like that. We had a newsletter, but I just realized now, I was like, man, there was a lot I could have done with that, right?
Yeah.
I think from the content perspective, I feel good about that.
Good.
The biggest thing in my mind that I would have to think through is, how do I balance, because I like doing content, driving this from a content perspective versus driving this from other sales channels, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I tell people it's easy, but it's so much harder than you think, because you have to write, you have to get on video, build credibility, have an element of proof, especially now that is believable. Say most people don't include customer testimonials. So a lot of people are just buying into what you're saying.
Right.
And they have to do that long enough. And then you have to hook them in to want to get, because they could be like, God dang, and that post, oh my God. They might not ever hit like. Right. They might never hit comment. One thing I've always said, and most people agree with it, if not, I guess all people I've talked to are like, yeah, me too. The people who buy from me, especially call it a high ticket, where it's call it 10K or more a month, they have never liked or commented on anything. They've followed.
Nope.
But they have never once liked or commented. They don't do it. You need your network, and you need to thank your network and be a community player for that. And I think that's important. Callan, do you get active in the comments? And if you're like me, you're going to say, not as much as I'd like to. And I probably need to do it more. But are you an active participant?
Yes, probably too much. To be honest with you, I'm probably the opposite. I'm probably too much. We all know this. The first hour of a post is the most critical time.
Yeah.
If LinkedIn doesn't see engagement within that first hour, it's just the odds of anything happening are, like, it's just not going to get what its full capacity is meant to get, right? So during that first hour, I block off time every single morning between 9 and 10 or 9:15 and 10:15, commenting. I'm responding to comments on my post, commenting on other people's posts. And like a lot of that's to help support, other people that are doing this as well,
Yeah.
that are talking a lot about what I talk about, which is sales leadership and growing a business. Like those are the two things that I focus on the most. It's responding to comments and supporting those others that are in that same space.
Again, the community, I think that is something I would call community with the right intentions. I won't go down the road of pods and my thoughts on them. I always say it feels a little bit unorganic to me. That's how I think a lot of people look at this and go, oh, gosh, do I have to join a pod to win? I don't know the answer to that. I know that I haven't, and I know that I don't plan to. And it's a feeling thing. I could be completely wrong. I've just been in a few for a day or two, and I just always go, sorry, it's not you, it's me. I just can't do it. It doesn't feel right to me. But I want you to unfold, like for the listeners here, what is the one big thing in 2024 when you think of your content strategy, whether it's a shift or a change or a measurement or a spend? What are you going to do differently? I'm not asking you to give away your playbook. Kind of I am.
I'm an open book.
In 2024 than you are doing today.
I don't believe it'll be anything major as far as, potentially back half focusing more on YouTube, right? So, my three big channels, I've got LinkedIn, the newsletter, and the podcast. The podcast that worked is really about driving this towards founders, right? Bring founders on, learn from them and push that out. That's a little bit separate than the rest of my content strategy. That's because I just love doing it and the conversations are so interesting. I'm being totally honest.
Like this, man. It's great. We're talking, I'm learning from you.
So the number one thing for me is to drive the newsletter. Like number one, and testing out all of the different ways in which to grow that, because that unlocks the key to selling more products. We'll always have the services business going, but once you drive enough newsletters, right, subscribers, and you can survey your audience, you survey the challenges that they're having, you build products to those challenges, you already have a built-in audience for all of this that you own. I don't own anybody on LinkedIn. I own my newsletter subscribers as long as I'm continuing to deliver high quality content that they're engaging with. So for me, it's that, right? It's drive more newsletter subscribers, understand them better, build products to help them solve their challenges.
Yeah. We in our first year, we're forecasting that about 300K of our million that we are trying to hit is going to come from a newsletter. So strongly agree with that statement. And so when I think about it, I hate to say this, but I don't hate to say it. Let's break it down. If I've got it's very therapeutic for me Sunday morning to come in here. It's like a ritual learning session. Like I sit down, I kind of go through all the things I saved on LinkedIn that week, maybe 10, 15, like some of your stuff, Chris Walker's stuff, go down the list. And then I kind of go like, okay, what do I want to talk about? This is what I was supposed to talk about this week. And then I, to your point, am writing that newsletter based off of the post that I've done the last week. The shift was like, well, wait, I need to do it opposite. I need to have the newsletter be the bulk of it. And then I need to break it down through the week. Because then I can bring the newsletter subscribers on a journey versus trying to make it exclusive, and it's not. And so those things go through there, and that's some complex thinking. Last question for you before we get to know you a little bit and what you do on the way out and where people can find you, because you've given us a lot of really good insights. Do you use a system to measure this for analytics, like Shield or anything like that?
100%.
Okay.
Shield in particular, yeah.
Okay. What's the one thing you would advise people on to get started with a newsletter today? They're probably like, cool, it sounds great. Like, what would I do though? Where would I start? Like, what's the advice you would give them? Where to start?
So it's a great question. Here's what I would say. If you're worried about, how do I structure this? What is a proven framework when to do this? There's a company called TypeShare that's excellent. They've got a ton of templates already pre-created, and you can build your info and your content based off of what they have, right? But with the newsletter, and I think this is more important than any of the other channels, right? LinkedIn's short. If you really wanted to post about something that you didn't have total confidence on, you probably could, until you get a few people who are like, oh, this is garbage. Like, this isn't true. And then your comments are going to be littered, and you got to defend that.
Yeah.
Like, that's something I always goes in my head is, can I defend this? Before I post it, can I defend this? The newsletter is kind of like that on steroids. You can't fake your way through the newsletter.
True.
So you've got to be interested in it. You've got to genuinely know about it, and you've got to do your research, right? Where if you think something, can you back that up? Can you find stats? Can you find studies? Can you find these different things in order to back that up?
Which makes you a better salesperson, right? Makes you a better leader.
100%.
So by doing
That's
the
exactly
newsletter
right.
exercise, this is my point. You're getting sharper. You're getting better. It is your business plan.
That's exactly right. And that was probably the number one reason for taking on all of the content writing myself. Again, I know this takes up time. This takes up more time for me to do that. But when I'm doing all of that myself, I'm working out all of these frameworks. Will I do that forever? Well, hard to say. At some point, if I think of the Andy Grove question, if a CEO came in here tomorrow, what would they change? Right? They're probably like, not doing this anymore.
Yeah.
Not doing the podcast.
But you enjoy it. So you get to.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And I think that's why I love working in this market, in this space, because the people who commit to spending the money are coming for a return. But I say they're also coming for an experience. And I love that we get to do that with them, and that Mackenzie worked in that way with you and me. And I always said, I'm going to have another ghostwriter again in the next 6 months. Like once we get through that burn rate phase of like getting to I'll probably be dialing Mackenzie back up and saying, are you ready to get the band back together? Because I know that I can write, but my best writing these days is probably not the stuff my audience wants to hear. If they really want to be informed about what we do, that's like a creative writing thing. And that would allow me to flex my creative writing and her to hone in on like this piece. And so probably saves me 2 hours a day of.
That's the key. And that's what I think about. That's on my mind quite a bit.
Yeah. It's a time, right? So like the business you're in, and we'll wrap with this because I want you to tell everybody exactly what you do. People are going to pay you for your expertise or sometimes your time. And that is the services business. Tell them what you do, what problem you solve, proof that you've solved it for people like them. And then how can they get a hold of you? Where can they reach you, Callan?
Yeah, absolutely. So Flash Growth, our mission, our goal is to help companies grow from 1 to 10 million. Typically, people come in, they've got good traction, and they need help turning that traction into rapid growth. And we do that in two ways. We do that on the revenue consulting side, and we do that on the RevOps side. So the way that I look at this is to grow from 1 to 10 million, you need the right people implementing the right process, supported by the right systems. And that's what we help them build. On how can they find me? Flashgrowth.com. That's where the newsletter is. The newsletter is all how-to guides. It's all things that are very actionable. And then the podcast That Worked, where we interview different founders of companies of all stages. And the key thing is just like this show, Steve, is breaking down those different pieces. What were the mistakes?
Yeah.
What did they learn? How do we go into detail on them?
Yeah. People love it. People love the vulnerability, the playbooks. They love it. I'm glad to see you have 300 people. I have no doubt, Callan, you'll have 3,000 people, but I love that you're niching down so much. Not everybody has to be Justin Walsh. And I think good for him. Great guy, right?
Yeah.
There are other versions of that where a lot of business leaders like Callan are driving their business through LinkedIn, living great lives, maybe different budgets, maybe bigger, maybe smaller, but it's working. And obviously that's why we're here today, is we know it works. And so people don't ever ask, does it work? They always usually say, how does it work? And that's the interesting part. Callan, thank you so much for joining us, breaking down what you're doing today, what you're thinking about doing. Last question for you. Do you have a link tree that's active on your LinkedIn?
I don't. I want to hear from you. How big of an impact has that had? Like, that's a legitimate question.
Yeah.
I'm super curious about this.
Yeah. On the way out, let's look here. So Linktree, last month it was around 380 unique clicks. Click to read was 72.8%. We are not getting, that we know of, leads through it, but it's pointing to all the content resources like YouTube. And a lot of the YouTube stuff is coming from that little About Us button. Instead of About Us or About Me, it's a link tree with about 8 to 10 different content, 2 hours of free LinkedIn training, things like that. But yeah, I'm looking right now, and it's the last 30-day run rate, 317. So down a little bit, but if you look at the clicking, like who clicked to view your profile, usually people are getting 300, 400, 500, maybe 1,000 a month. And so I'm always like, why not give them something else to go look at? And I always like to ask that question because I've got a video out there on how to do it. And I think it's been one of the most powerful little tips I can share with everybody. And that's on our YouTube library as well. So make sure you hack that, download. Callan, I'm going to come looking for it. If you don't have it, I'm going to ask for your logins and give you one myself. I think it'll change your life. Brother, thanks for joining us on the Magnetic Podcast. I hope you have a great day, brother.
This was so much fun. I never get to talk about this stuff, so this was exciting. Thanks for having me on.
Very, very cool.